No one ever chooses to die in the swamp, but some are left there, and some live anyway. It began with footsteps fading, not galloping, not shouting, just the soft crunch of boots over roots, leaving her behind, and then the silence. That thick, terrible silence. The swamp didn't roar. It waited. She lay curled in the half-mud, half-water cradle of the land, like something the earth had forgotten but not buried. Her hair tangled with reeds. Her breath was slow, uneven. Blood darkened the hem of her skirt. A deep cut ran down her leg where the brush had clawed her during the fall. But her eyes were open, watching the sky, wide, grey, unmoved. They'd promised it was the safest shortcut, that the swamp could be crossed in 2 days, maybe 3, dry-footed, if you followed the elk trails. But there were no trails, just rot and fog and teeth in the water. He'd said she'd be fine. The man who smiled too wide. He'd offered her a ride, and when she refused, said she was too proud for her own good. Then when the wagon broke its wheel, and men began to argue, and fear stirred like a snake beneath leaves, he'd left her. She's more weight than help, anyway, he'd said. And that was that. No one stopped him. They all followed. She tried to walk. For a time, limped through the high grass, using a branch like a cane. But the swamp is not kind. It drinks water and people the same. And when she slipped into the bog's cold teeth, she did not scream. She simply sank, not deep, just enough to feel forgotten. They call it Killer Swamp for a reason. The trees grow like crooked judges. The water looks still until it pulls you under. There are stories of women whose hair grows into the moss and never leaves. She had heard those stories, and now she was part of one. The sky above grew darker, not from nightfall, but from clouds, thick and low. Pressing, she blinked up into them, barely breathing, somewhere far off. A raven called once, then nothing. Hours passed like years. Dreams flickered behind her eyes. Her mother's hands, a red ribbon, the way sun used to taste on. Skin she could not tell what was memory and what was pain. But then a shape moved. At first she thought it was the fog, then a spirit, then death. But it did not vanish. It stepped closer, a tall figure, silent as shadow. Dark braids fell over broad shoulders, a leather coat worn and soaked from the swamp mist. One hand held a spear, not raised, just resting, and eyes like still water, watching her, not with fear, not with pity, with presence. She closed her eyes again. If he was real, he would pass. If he was death, she would sleep. But then warmth touched her skin. A hand, strong, calloused, brushed mud from her cheek, checked her pulse, touched her wrists like it mattered. She stirred, and for the first time in days, whispered please ... A word barely formed. He didn't speak. He lifted. She felt her body rise, not in pain, in relief. He cradled her like something precious, not broken, and he walked, slow-footed, slow as though the swamp parted for him. Branches did not snag him, the mud did not cling. He moved like he'd been born of this land, and perhaps he had. The mist thickened behind them, swallowing where she had lain. But ahead, it opened ever so slightly. She didn't know his name, didn't know if he was man or angel or ghost, but she knew the feeling of being carried. And sometimes that's all we need to believe again. A fire flickered in the distance, small, protected. He stepped toward it, and with the quiet of a promise. laid her gently down beside the flame. The swamp had tried to take her, but something stronger had found her first. Some people speak with hands, some with silence, and some with the way they stay when others don't. The fire crackled low. It wasn't the kind built to chase back the night, but the kind meant to keep a single soul warm. She lay curled near, it wrapped in an old hide that smelled of pine and river smoke. When she stirred, her first breath was sharp, not from pain, but from the absence of it. Her wounds had been cleaned, tied with long leaves and wet moss. Her lips, once cracked, were soft again. It felt like waking from drowning, and beside her, the man, still watching, he sat cross-legged, not close, but not far, as if he knew the exact distance a soul needs to feel safe. He held a small carving knife in his palm, turning it once, then again, as though it helped him listen. He didn't ask her name, didn't offer his, but his eyes met hers with something more sacred than questions. I saw you. I came. She tried to sit. Pain throbbed like a warning drum through her leg. He reached slow, open-handed, and offered her a hollowed-out gourd of water. She took it, sipped, winced, nodded. He didn't smile. Not fully, but his face softened, as if to say, "That's enough for today." She tried to speak. Her voice cracked on the way out. "Why? Help me." He looked to the smoke rising from the fire. Let the wind answer for him. Then said, low and steady, "I don't like the way they left you." Later, as the fog thickened again and frogs began their songs, he boiled something in a pot, herbs, bones, roots. She watched him move, not a wasted gesture. Every motion felt like it had been learned through hardship. She didn't know who he'd lost, but she felt it in the way he stirred, like memory lived in his hands. The food was bitter but warm. She ate slowly, not because it hurt, but because she hadn't eaten with peace in a long time. He let her finish before serving himself. That was the first lesson. He made sure she was full before he fed. For the first 2 days, they barely spoke. Instead, they built a rhythm. She watched how he cleaned wounds with water drawn from beneath willow roots, how he used bark to splint, crushed herbs between stones, tied knots in sinew without thinking. He had done this before, for others, for someone he loved, maybe lost. She asked, "Once do you live here?" He looked around them, the trees, the moss, the fog. The land doesn't ask questions, it just listens. That night, she slept with her back to the fire, facing him. He didn't sleep, just carved a small shape. She couldn't yet tell what. On the third day, her voice was stronger. She asked him his name. He answered softly, Tao. Then asked for hers. She gave it, hesitantly, like handing over something that might be dropped. But he didn't repeat it, just held it in the quiet. That was enough. She tried to stand that morning. He caught her, not roughly, like catching a falling leaf. Let her try again. This time, he steadied her elbow. They walked 3 steps, then 4, then 5. He began teaching her small things. This root is bitter, but kills pain. That flower draws snakes. If you hear frogs, stop. Singing, something is near. He didn't over-explain, he showed her. Then let her choose to remember. She did. Every detail, because when someone shows you how to stay alive, you listen. He built a sling for her leg, tied between 2 long sticks and draped in hide. You'll walk better with it, he said. She nodded then. Paused. You could have left me once I stood. He looked her dead in the eye. But you didn't fall alone. So you don't have to rise alone either, later. He handed her something wrapped in deerskin. She unwrapped it slowly. A spoon carved from swamp cedar, her initials etched near the handle. Her fingers trembled slightly as she held it. She looked up, but he was already walking toward the trees. That night, for the first time, she laughed. He had slipped in the mud while fishing, face first, arms flailing, when he surfaced. Dripping, she couldn't help it. The laugh escaped her like something. Freed, he looked at her, blinked, and let out a half-grin, a flash of mischief in a man, who mostly moved like stone. She handed him a dry cloth, and said softly, "I think the swamp just claimed your pride." He chuckled once. It can have it. They sat by the fire, shoulder to shoulder, not touching, but knowing. The swamp, once cold and cruel, felt different now. Not safe, but sacred. Not empty, but shared. She looked at him through the shadows and whispered, "You found me when I was already gone." He replied, "No, I found you when you were choosing to come back." And in that quiet space, she finally believed she might live again. Some places are too sacred for fear, too quiet for lies. That's where love begins. Not in thunder, but in stillness. The swamp had not grown smaller, but she had grown braver. She stood now each morning, slow but sure-footed, the makeshift sling. Steadying her steps, she learned where the moss curled soft, where the roots snapped sharp. She could tell when the water would sink you and when it would hold. He watched her, quietly, never praising, never correcting, just watching, and she understood he was letting her reclaim something. Her own rhythm, her own breath. Tahu took her deeper into the forest that week, past trees that bent like dancers in prayer, past water so still it mirrored the sky. He showed her how to read tracks in the mud, taught her that when the frogs fall, silent the gators rise. But there were places he never took her, shadows he avoided. "There are places even snakes don't go," he said once. "Why not?" she asked. "Some places remember pain, so they don't welcome more." She nodded. Some hearts were like that, too. One day, she asked him if he'd ever been lost in this swamp. He didn't answer with words. He just pointed to his chest, then looked to the trees. That night, he handed her a necklace woven from river grass, with a single piece of red glass hanging from its center. "It's not worth much," he said, "but the river gave it to me, and now I give it to you." She didn't thank him. She slipped it around her neck and let the glass rest against her collarbone. Some gifts aren't meant to be spoken of. They're meant to be kept. She had begun to laugh again, softly at first, then louder, like something shaken loose inside. Once, she caught Tohu off guard, slipped behind him and mimicked the bird call he'd spent a week teaching her. He jumped, spun, then smirked. "You learn fast," he said. "Only from the best," she replied. They built a rhythm between silence and smiles. She cooked fish. He gathered bark for tea. They shared stories, not all at once, like slow-sipped rain from a leaf. She told him of the man who'd left her behind, how he'd once held her hand like a prize. He hadn't earned how he only liked her quiet. How he told her she'd be a burden out here. She looked down. "Maybe I was," she whispered. Tahu tilted his head. "You were wounded, not weak." And that was the kindest thing anyone had ever said to her. Later, he told her about the winter he lost his wife, the silence she left behind, How he came to the swamp to be alone, not to die, but to stop feeling so alive. She didn't ask more. Some griefs are honored best by not digging too deep. She placed her hand near his, not touching, just near, close enough to be felt. That was enough. The next morning, she rose early and found him standing in the mist, eyes closed, face to the wind. He opened them as she approached. "The wind says they're coming," he said. "Who?" she asked. He didn't answer, but her stomach turned. Some part of her knew, the ones who left her. They weren't finished, but that night there were no enemies, only two souls by firelight. She asked him what made him stay when he could have walked away at any time. He thought for a long while, then said, "You looked like someone who hadn't been seen in a long time." She nodded. Tears didn't fall, they rose, but she held them back. Instead, she said, "And you looked like someone who finally could." They didn't kiss, they didn't even touch, but they leaned, and the swamp, once cruel, once cold, felt like home. The past always finds its way back, but so does the part of you that knows how to face it. It was just after dawn. Mist lay soft across the ground like folded linen. The swamp was still, listening. You stood with his hand to the wind. The crows had flown early. The frogs had gone silent. He turned to her, no panic in his voice, only steadiness. "They're near." She didn't ask who, she already knew. There are men whose footsteps the earth never forgets, because they carry lies too. Heavy to sink they came, slow at first, horses picking careful paths through mud. 4 men, 1 wagon, and at the front, the one who left her. His name didn't matter anymore, but his face, smug, polished, cruel in its casualness, burned like salt on an open wound. He looked around, called her name once, like he owned it. She did not answer. She stood in the trees, watching, deciding, turned to her, quiet and sure. "You don't have to face them," but she shook her head. "I do," and she stepped from the trees. She wasn't limping now, not quite strong, but upright. The necklace still hung at her throat, and she wore a look he'd never seen on her before, peace, sharpened into resolve. He blinked, feigned surprise. "Well, look what the swamp spit back out," he said, chuckling. "We thought you were dead." "You hoped I was," she said. The smile faded from his lips. "Now wait a minute. We tried. You fell behind." "We looked." "No," she interrupted, voice steady as the wind. "You didn't look. You left." The men behind him shuffled, uneasy. One shifted his weight. Another looked away. Guilt is loud when the swamp is quiet. "Come on now," he said, trying to grin again. "We'll bring you back. Got food? Got room?" She stepped closer. "I have food. I have fire. And I have someone who didn't run when it got dark." At that moment, Tohu stepped forward, silent as ever, bow across his back, eyes locked on the man. He didn't speak. He didn't have to. The man's jaw tightened. "That's your pet, now." Tohu didn't blink. "She is no one's, and never was." The man scoffed. "This ain't your land, Tahu." Stepped closer. "It wasn't yours either. When you left her in it to die, there was a moment, thin as glass, where it could have ended in silence. But pride is loud and cowards hate being seen." The man raised his hand. There was steel in it. She stepped back, but Tohu moved like the wind in one swift motion. The man was on the ground, weapon knocked away, mud on his chest. Gasping, the others stood frozen. "Tahu." Didn't strike again. He simply stood over him. The swamp remembers. Those who lie, then stepped back. She looked down at the man who once held her heart like a leash, then turned away. You're not my story anymore. And she walked. The other men said nothing. They followed her with their eyes. But no one moved to stop her, because some power can't be touched. It can only be witnessed. That night, the swamp was quieter than ever, as if it too was relieved. They sat by the fire, the last fire they would build there. She looked at him, hands wrapped around a bowl of warm broth. You didn't save me, she said. I stood up myself. He nodded, but I waited while you remembered how she reached out, then slow, sure, and took his hand, calloused, scarred, still warm. What do we do now? She asked. He smiled. Walk out together. No rush, just forward, and they did. Come morning, they packed only what they needed, left no trail, no fire, no claim, only a clearing where something beautiful had once healed.